about I start? Good morning, everyone. Welcome along. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's masterclass on active learning. My name's Grahame Gerstenberg. I'm CEO of Magical Learning, and my co-host and partner in all things amazing learning today is Danette. I'm going to let Danette introduce herself in just a second. I would like to formally start the masterclass today by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, their ongoing connection to land, culture, and community, and pay my respects to, or our respects to, elders past and present. Now I'm going to hand over to Danette to introduce herself and perhaps take you through the first section of today's masterclass.
Beautiful. And welcome, Shay. I just saw that Shay's joined us as well, so welcome. And one of the things, just as I'm introducing this, to think about is when you've had a bad experience in terms of learning, and why was that, what caused that, and we're going to come back to this in a second. And also, when did you have a good experience in learning, and what were some of the things that created that? So today what we're going to cover is, first of all, what does the term active learning really mean? And how can we apply it, whether we're doing something like we're doing today, which is a virtual workshop or masterclass, or whether it's just you learning yourself, and how do you embed that? Or you may have children that you want to get them more involved and enthusiastic about learning, or it could be adults as well. So what it really means, and why it is so important for all of us to continuously develop ourselves, and why active learning is a really great skill to do that. We're going to look at a bit of brain science, as we love to do. And then we're going to share a number of tools and techniques that you can take away and apply for yourself and others to increase that active learning. So let's start sharing by thinking about, and we'll use the chat box for this one, thinking about when you had an experience, a learning experience, and it wasn't so great. What were some of the factors that caused it to be not so great? So in the chat box, I'd love for you to share one or two things that you noticed that made it not so great. And I'm going to share, and I'm sure Grahame will as well. So away we go. One of the things for me was I've sat in many a lecture where I was just talked at. So Grahame put in his terrible dad jokes.
I just thought I'd get in before somebody else did.
Thank you, Kathleen. I just was talking on mute. The person doing the training had PowerPoints and just read from them. Yep, pet hate of mine, as you could have just received them and not wasted the time. Absolutely. So it's okay to use PowerPoint, but not reading word for word. I absolutely agree. Visuals can make it much more interactive, and sometimes just turning it off is also really good. So I like that. Thank you. Now, Shay, just want to check in. Was there anything you wanted to add to that as well? So we're a nice small group today, so I'd love to make it as interactive as possible. Now, the other thing is, tell me something that actually made a learning experience good or great. So some hints around that. For me, I've been on a number where they were engaging, they were visual, had stories, and they were much more learner focused. I like that too, Kathleen. Interesting topic. So when the person knows their stuff, that's really engaging, because their passion usually comes through too. Grahame, passionate knowledge, ego-free facilitator. I love that, Shay, too. Encouragement, being able to make those mistakes in that environment. So they're all some things that can help us. And when we talk about active learning, we know from the brain science that we all learn better when we're engaged in our own learning, and when we are not just sitting there. It's a bit like the funnel model where, the person just talks at us and it goes in this funnel and it's expected to sort of just come into us, versus us maybe taking notes, being asked questions, using the chat box, opening our mic, turning on our video. All of those things can just make it so much better. But they're not the only things that are active learning. Let's look at the next slide. Thank you, Grahame. So poll here. So your primary interest in active learning, and this is really for us just to get an idea of why you're on today, is it for your personal growth? Is it for growing your team? Maybe it's for helping your children learn, or maybe it's none of the above. Now that poll, I'm just going to check with Grahame because he is good at polls. So you're just going to put the answer in the chat box?
Yeah, just a letter.
Okay, perfect.
I think a letter is fine. I've just thought actually maybe I should have added all of the above rather than none of the above, but thanks, Shay.
Excellent. Beautiful. Thanks, Kathleen.
Brilliant.
No? Okay. I just always like to check in. All right, we might go to the next slide.
We will. So tips to help focus as we are always learning. Awesome. Thanks, Kathleen.
That. Yes.
In fact, we're going to talk about the whole focus and attention thing in just a second. So great segue. Well done. Gold star for you. One of our favourite quotes from Alvin Toffler, who is something of a futurist with a particular focus on learning. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those that cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn and relearn. And I think the unlearning part in particular is hugely important in the context of where we're at today. And not just because of COVID and all of the fun that's happened as a result of that, all of the disruption, the mess, the chaos last year. It's understanding that as we continue to move forward, and we can't go backwards as much as we maybe would like to go back to the way things that were before COVID. That's not possible. So when we think about going forward, one of the important things from the way I look at this quote is the unlearning part and being open to acknowledging or understanding that some of the stuff that we've learned in the past isn't going to serve us going forward. So we need to let go of it. We need to unlearn. And sometimes it's a little easier said than done, but it certainly is possible to do that. So again, quick question for everyone on the call this morning. What would you like to learn about active learning? If there's anything specifically that we haven't already covered, I'd love to hear from you. By the way, feel free to unmute yourself, turn your video on and sing to us your answer. We're also okay with that. Danette's a big fan of that. Just saying.
Or they could just speak.
Come on, it's supposed to be more active. Karaoke learning is a thing, Kathleen. It is a thing. If you've ever spoken to somebody who's gone through a karaoke session where they sort of got dragged into it, there's a lot of lessons that they take away from that. Just saying. Okay, I thought it might be helpful just to jump into a couple of quick definitions. When we talk about active learning, is it really, so what, am I learning on the run? Do I have to be moving around? Can I sit still and still learn actively? So here's one quote from Smart Sparrow, an online company that does a lot of work in digital learning delivery. Active learning, any learning activity in which the student participates or interacts with the learning process, as opposed to passively taking in the information. And just another one, similar sort of theme from Forbes magazine. Active learning is where learners engage, apply, and reflect immediately on the knowledge they've gained. And I think that for us, the key message behind active learning is, as a learner, which is all of us, we have to be a lot more proactive and a lot more engaged than perhaps we may have been in the past. Danette's going to talk to you about some of the brain science behind active learning.
Thank you. So we know for a start, because our brain is 2% of our body's mass, but it uses 20% of our energy, and that's measured through blood flow. So it's a very energy hungry beast, our brain, which means that it is really quite fussy about what it lets through to the front part of our brain where we're going to take in information and learn and grow. So if you think of yourself when you are reading something and it's really boring, and let's imagine that you're reading it on a device, I'd love, if you can, for you to turn on your video and show me exactly what you do when you read something that's boring when you're on a device. So let's turn on our videos if you can, and I know some of you won't be able to, but if you can, just for a second, so we can see each other. No problems, Kathleen, I can see you don't have a video. even if you can't turn the video on, but I'd love for you to do the action that you do when you come across something that is boring. For me, because my brain goes, I don't want to learn that. Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. It's the same, isn't it? It's just like, no, I'm not going to give myself that, waste that time reading something that's really boring. So what we know about our brain is that anything that is potentially new, interesting, and or personal, and we use the acronym NIP, so I'll just type that in the chat box. New, interesting, personal is going to engage our brain far faster than something that's boring. And as Shay said, we then zone out. We just go, oh, yeah. And it's just because our brain, it's just a function of our brain that when it's boring, our brain goes, I've already heard it, I know it, blah, 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 blah. So it just goes, don't want to pay attention. But when we can change that focus to, okay, what's new about what I'm learning? What's interesting that maybe I could apply, and what really would work for me is, or, if you're teaching others, what would work for them to make it that more new, interesting, personal? Because the moment something's new, we are hardwired from many, back in cave people days, if it was new, maybe we needed to know it because it could help us survive. So when we know it's new, we will at least give some attention to that until it proves it might be boring, we already know it, etc. The moment it's interesting, it sparks in our brain. We're like, oh, pay attention. And the most persuasive word in the English language is you. So we know that, for example, if we were walking along in the savannah, and all of a sudden I go, Shay. Shay's brain will pick up the fact that I've said her name, and she'll start looking around at, okay, what's Danette trying to tell me? Because back in cave people days, it could have been that there's a saber-toothed tiger running behind her and I, and it's time for us to run really fast, or whatever you do to escape from a saber-toothed tiger. So the moment we make it personal actually really gives our brain that, oh, I need to pay attention. No stress at all, Shay, about videos. We just thought if people can turn them on, they can. But if you can't, you can't. So some of the things we also know about brain science is the more multisensory it is, the more likely we are to take it in. For example, passive learning is really just about you sitting there. Maybe they put some slides up and maybe you just listen, but there's no activity from the learner's perspective. Now, simple thing that a lot of people will do is, like I do, is pick up a notebook and a pen and write. Now, that's a way to at least have a bit of movement in terms of our senses. We know things such as taste and smell can also give us quite interesting ways of retaining knowledge. For example, they know that if you smell a smell from your past, it'll often evoke that picture and those feelings from way back when. So if you had a grandmother like I did who baked fresh bread, I smell that fresh bread and I'm like, oh, I'm taken back to that time when my grandmother was doing that. So that multisensory can really help us. Using both cognitive and also emotions can embed what we're learning as well. And in fact, for all of us, when it becomes emotional, if we can if it's good emotion, we go, but sometimes a bad emotion can also teach us. Now, sometimes it teaches us not in great ways. For example, we were talking so Grahame and I drove from Sydney home this morning before this masterclass, and on the way we were talking about how we've noticed lately a lot of people are avoiding difficult conversations because their emotions around those this is going to be unpleasant. But when people actually work on that and go through the emotions, they actually learn that on the other side of a difficult conversation is better understanding between one another and better connection. So they can be ways that can really help us. The other thing we love is to be social in our learning. And this is why, if video doesn't work, if audio still works, we can chat to one another on an online workshop, and that will help us to connect with one another. Connection's really important. And it's why when we asked at the start about, your good experiences and your not so good experiences on learning, part of that exercise was to focus you on active learning, but part of it was also for us to share our experiences and start to connect and bond a little bit. Because when we do that, we create a safe space for all of us to learn. And without that safety, people won't speak up, they won't share in the chat box, etc., which makes it less of a great experience for everyone. Obviously, the more active we are towards using more parts of the brain, which gives us more ability to actually learn that information. And one of the things I know is that if, for example, and I'm conscious I've been talking a little bit too long at the moment, if we don't do an activity about every 10 minutes or shift up what we're doing, people's attention span will start to wane. So what we're going to do now is, I want you, if you wouldn't mind, if you can find the raise hand button that will be with where you found the chat, that should have a raise the hand. I would like you to raise your hand if you've ever noticed that your attention span does start to wave if you're being talked at for about more than 10 minutes in a learning exercise. I raised mine too. So it's one of those things that even just changing it a little bit to bring in that active, whatever it is, can be really, really important because it brings us back to that focus. I read recently that our attention span used to be about every 12 seconds. We would our brain would shift around a little bit. They now reckon it's less than a goldfish. So they reckon it's about 8 seconds. And then we're like, oh, shiny, unless we keep that attention coming back through different ways of doing things. So a simple thing we can do as you're going through, say, whether it's face-to-face or online, is maybe every half an hour or so, but we're going to try it now because it is the morning and it is a good thing to do, is we're going to just do a little stretch because moving helps us. So I'd love everyone just to put your hands above your body if you can, even if you're sitting down, just a little bit to the side, a little bit to the other side, and then shake it out a little bit. In the chat box, how does that feel? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I love it. Just that movement, rather than if you're sitting listening, can be really, really important. Funky. I saw that in Graham's chat box. So one of the things I'd say, I love that, Kathleen. Yeah, that's the problem when you do have video, everyone can see. When you don't, yeah, it's a good thing. And Al, I love that. Got me going again. Beautiful. So one of the things I know, and this is quite a scary stat, and I share it quite a lot, until the beginning of the 20th century, our human knowledge doubled once a century. It is currently doubling once every 13 months due to all of the technical changes that are happening, and shortly is expected to happen every 12 minutes. Now, how does that make you feel? So our human knowledge currently doubling every 13 months, shortly going to become every 12 minutes. Thank you, Shay. Overwhelmed. It's quite scary, isn't it? When you think about that rapid amount of change. So the other thing, aggressively indifferent, you can explain that later. So, for example, I finished a book very recently, which is called The Future is Faster Than You Think. And it was talking about how Uber and a couple of other companies have already got cars that will actually fly, come and pick you up. They don't need a driver. So they will, and they're testing this in San Francisco and another city in the US at the moment. And the flow-on effect of that is that these things, these devices will turn up, people will hop in them, they will fly from different places to different places, cut down commute time, but also cut down people actually driving. So for local governments, where a lot of their fees will come from, say, parking fees, perhaps speeding tickets, etc., that's going to disrupt that industry. Now imagine that's just one disruption. So every day we are going to be disrupted by different things happening that will change our world. So for us, the more active we can be in our own learning, the better. And we talk about 1% growth daily. So if you grow 1% a day, doesn't feel like much. So it might be, say, watching a video and learning something new. It might be reading a chapter of a book or reading for 10 minutes. It could be listening to a podcast or an audio book. It could be doing what we're doing today. But if you continuously increase your learning every day, so every day you just learn 1% more, in 12 months' time, you'll be nearly 37 times different in terms of what you know than where you are today. Now that is amazing, because that will help you stay at the top of the curve rather than those that don't learn very much at all and maybe do it once in 12 months, then they're going to be disadvantaged by not doing that continuous learning. So we recommend a lot about looking at how do you create learning that's bite-sized, using things such as your commute time, your waiting time to learn rather than just be bored. Or playing Candy Crush used to be the game. I'm sure it's something else nowadays. So making it a daily habit, because once it becomes a habit, it is something that is easier to do rather than not do. So I'm curious, I'd really love, whether you want to open your mic or whether you just want to put in the chat box, what are some of the little things you do to learn each day? And it may not be every day, but some days. What do you do to learn? Oh, Grahame just wrote Candy Crush was so 2010s. I love it, Kathleen. You read during your lunchtime. So, Kathleen, do you read books? Do you read articles? What's your process there? Kathleen, you're okay. You're allowed to play Candy Crush. And Al, you listen to audiobooks, and I know you love audiobooks, so that's awesome. Read non-fiction, beautiful. Shay, set aside time for reading before bed. Again, another great habit, because when we go to bed then and go to sleep, our brain's digesting that information and making connections, which can give you creative thoughts, innovative thoughts around that information. So before bedtime can be a really great thing. Now, that's a really great question, Shay. How do we retain all that learning? So one of the things is we won't retain all of it, but we're going to share some strategies that will help us retain more of it shortly. But it is a really good question to ask yourself, because, for example, all of us have different learning preferences. So I can share, and I'll give you a visual example. Recently, I read Jim Collins' new book. Jim Collins, for those of you who don't know him, wrote Good to Great, which is a really fabulous book. And this is a book that the first book he wrote, and he wrote it with his mentor, a gentleman called Bill Lazia. And what Jim Collins did, because Bill passed away a while ago, is Jim refreshed it for what's going on now. Now, one of the things I like to do to help me remember, Shay and everyone else, is that I put sticky tabs on points that I wasn't aware of. And that helps me to come back, a couple of days later or a week later, I'll come back to that and just read a bit deeper about those areas that I've flagged, because I want to develop that knowledge. So that's one simple thing I do. And Kathleen, I'm just reading yours. Check out non-mainstream media sources to find out what is going on in the world. I like that, yeah. So you're looking at not necessarily news.com or whatever, but those ones where you get, really good, interesting information. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, highlighting as well. whether it's an actual book or whether it's a virtual book, a lot of them allow you to highlight so you can go back and actually look at those things. If for me it's something that I'm going to utilize in classroom, I'll often write it down as well, and think about how can I add value to this to explain it in a way that works for others too. And later on, we'll share a technique around that as well. So I would recommend, and this is what I've done all my life, and I know Grahame does it as well, is rather than trying to learn lots in one hit, is break it down to what areas do I want to learn more about? What do I need to also let go of in terms of my learning? So there might be some knowledge that no longer is serving me and no longer is the latest way of looking at things. And an example is that Pluto is no longer a planet. Now, when I was a child, Pluto was a planet. And so when you learn something as a child and then later on it's found out not to be fact, our brain's like, but I learned it as part of how I learned the planets. How do I unlearn that? But it's actually accepting sometimes what we know we need to let go of. And that was that quote that Grahame shared a little bit earlier. All right. Thank you, Grahame. So when we are teaching others, think about what is the approach you're going to use to help in terms of active learning. For example, a little bit later on, I'm going to get you to find a piece of paper because we're going to use it in an activity. So at the start, you could say, look, it'd be really good before we start, I'd love for you to go and get a piece of paper. Or when the activity happens, you could go, okay, I would love for you to go and get a bit of paper. And you can actually show people objects. That's a really nice thing. And in fact, we could take the slides off if we want. I'm not going to get Grahame to it at the moment, but we could take it off. When we do that activity, we'll get rid of slides entirely and we'll work together watching what I do with that. And then you're going to do it as well. Setting ground rules. And it could be as simple as, okay, when you enter the room, put yourself on mute. If you want to speak, maybe raise your hand. And the rules are up to you, but it's just allowing everyone to be on the same page when we're doing, particularly virtual. In the classroom, you still need those ground rules. And it could be as simple as, we're going to have a 10-minute break. And at the end of that 10 minutes, I will start on time. And that encourages people to be back on time. The important thing is to make sure that what you're doing focuses on what people actually need to learn. And that can be, today we're learning about active learning, so I want to share a number of tools, including the one with the paper a bit later on, that will help us to actually be able to utilise active learning. And, we've already done a little bit. We talked about the tabs, and Kathleen shared her highlighting, and I shared the bit about writing stuff down. And one of the things is, if you use things like breakout rooms, make sure the first one that you give people a little bit of time to introduce themselves, but also afterwards that there's time to debrief what they've learned in the activity. And whether it's a breakout room or just an active learning activity, what is it that you learn? What can you share with others? So that's a really important thing to incorporate in what you're doing.
Thanks, Sam.
Passing back to Grahame.
So I thought it might be helpful to just talk a little about the mechanics of learning for human beings. So, and this really is just looking at the neuroscience behind how do we actually learn? And I'm talking about how do we create long-term learning. So this is not so much about how do we cram really well for an exam that's happening in 6 hours' time. This is how do we acquire knowledge that we retain over time. And then we talk about how do we apply active learning around this model. So the model I wanted to share with you is one that was developed by the Neuro Leadership Institute, again, based on a lot of research that's happened over the last 120 years in terms of how the human brain functions. The model is called the AGES model, and it's an acronym. A is for attention. So one of the things that we know about how we learn well, how we learn effectively, is that we have to pay attention to whatever it is we're learning. Now, if you have ever been like me, full disclosure, I have in the past before I knew what I was doing, before I really understood how silly it was. There have been times in the past where I have tried to watch a video or joined in on a webinar online, and part of my attention was on the webinar, but part of my attention was on something else that I needed to get done, and I couldn't make a decision, or I didn't make a decision at the time between the two. So what ended up happening was I didn't really pay proper attention to either of them. At the end of the webinar, I couldn't really remember much at all of what was discussed. Attention is crucial in terms of how we learn. So if I can't pay attention to what it is that I'm trying to learn, it's not going to work. And whether I'm active or passive doesn't make any difference at all. But if my attention is not on the thing that I'm learning or that I want to learn, I need to start there. It's one of the reasons why in the digital learning space at the moment, things like gamification are so popular, because they, if done well, they capture our attention. And that's the first step. If you want to help your children learn, if you want to help your team learn, if you want to help, say, anybody learn something, the first step on this model is attention. And it's not just capturing the attention at the start, it's how do we keep your attention throughout. So one of the things that Danette and I will attempt to do during this masterclass is obviously change up who is doing the speaking. We'll ask questions, we'll get you involved in stretching exercises. There will be a pop-up karaoke session before the masterclass finishes. I'm just letting you know now so that you don't run away and miss it. We will try and make this interesting, new, personal, and slightly embarrassing maybe. So attention, really important. And following on with the theme, well, actually we'll get to that in a sec, but I just want to talk about the idea that a key part of active learning is that as the learner, I am much more responsible for my learning. So gone are the days where we can just sort of sit back and say, well, here I am, teach me. It doesn't work that way. So first is attention. The second is generate. And this is where we generate new connections, increase the neural pathways that are linked around whatever this information topic idea is that I want to learn. So one of the ways that, again, that we can do that in an active learning context is invite people to have a conversation about something that one of them has learned or something that they've both learned, because the conversation itself can help strengthen the neural connections. We can generate new connections in our brain around that particular thing or topic or idea, whatever it happens to be. The E in AGES stands for emotion. Again, one of the things that we understand about how the brain functions is that when we attach emotion to neural connections, those connections are stronger, they last longer. So I guess this is a potential warning or flag, if you like, for all of us, is I just saw Kathleen's. Kathleen, I'm just going to assume, because I can, that your great comment was about the pop-up karaoke. Thank you. If it wasn't, then I'm just going to assume it was anyway. A bit slow on the uptake. I was in the car for 4 hours, so it's a long drive to get home before we ran this. If I'm in a learning environment, so whether this is completely self-paced and I'm doing something off my own bat, whether I'm in a masterclass like this, whether I'm in a classroom, any sort of learning environment, if I have no emotional attachment whatsoever, not just to the learning process, but to the subject matter. What? Sorry, I just saw Danette's comment. Oh, Grahame drove all the way home. I slept. I said, well, hang on. No, I had a nap on the way because that's what I thought the cruise control was for. There we go. Learn something else. If I have no emotional attachment to whatever it is I'm trying to learn, that should be a message for me or a signal that I need to rethink my approach to the learning. It doesn't mean I have to be wildly excited about it, but if I have an emotional attachment to that learning, to whatever it is I'm trying to learn, that will help strengthen the neural connection. Still stuck on the flying taxis. Perfect timing, Kathleen. Perfect timing. Fortunately, Danette is in a different room, clearly, so she didn't spit that water all over me. So thank you very much for that. And the last thing around learning is spacing. Again, one of the things that we understand about how we retain knowledge longer term is that we space out delivery of or access to or engagement with that information. In other words, we revisit it. Danette talked before about the little flags that she puts in books that she reads. So one of the things that I learned a long time ago, this is just a notebook. This is from an iConnect. There's a coaching program that Danette and I were involved with that was run by Robin Sharma, who used to be our business coach. So one of the things that we do when we go to conferences is we take notes, like oodles and oodles and oodles and oodles and page after page after page after page of notes. Because again, we know from brain science, if you hear something and don't do anything about it, you'll retain a very small portion of that in, say, a week or 2 weeks' time. If you hear it and write it down, it instantly creates more neural connections. It strengthens it. But what we know from spacing is that we need to revisit that information over time for it to stick. So one of the things that Danette and I do with all of the notebooks that we have from all of the conferences that we've been to is we'll periodically get the notebooks back out and go back over the notes. It's also one of the reasons why I like to reread some books, both fiction and non-fiction. I read a lot of, well, I don't read a lot. I read fiction because I love language. And for me, fiction is one way of expanding my vocabulary, because I read books from people who are written by authors who have an amazing vocab. But it doesn't really matter what it is. So if you go to training courses or programs, take notes. If you attend a masterclass, take notes, because we know it helps increase the neural connections, but create opportunities to revisit the notes that you take, or listen to the audio book again, or read, go back over the book, going back to Kathleen's comment before about highlighting. You know, pull that book back out again in a month's time and just go back over the parts that you highlighted, and then pull it out again in another month's time. We know that if we revisit and re-engage with new information, new knowledge, and we spaced out over a period of time, and the period of time could be a couple of months, it could be 6 months, but we know absolutely it will improve our learning. This is my first bike. All right, it's not, but it's the one I wanted, but I wasn't allowed to have it. Mum and Dad, I forgive you, I love you very much, but still, you know, it hurt. So there's the old saying about, once you learn to ride a bike, you never forget it. You can always get back on and ride it again. That's sort of true. Once you learn, if you can remember, assuming that you learned to ride a bike, and maybe it wasn't like this, but perhaps it had training wheels. I remember helping our eldest daughter to learn to ride a push bike, and the bike didn't have training wheels. So I was literally running 250 meters down the road with her, and every time I let go of her, she fell off. If we use this as a metaphor with the ages analogy, the ages model. So first time I want to help a child learn how to ride a bike, if they have no interest in it, if their attention is actually still stuck on the PS4 or on the movie they just watched, or the fact that they want ice cream, or they want to go down to the shops and buy something, or they don't like their friend because their friend yelled at them, if I haven't got their attention, it's not going to be possible to help them learn how to ride a bike. So attention is massively important. If we want to help somebody learn how to ride a bike much faster, one of the things we could do to help them generate more neural connections is, after they've had a couple of practice sessions, get them to sit down and have a conversation with one of their friends or a sibling who's already riding a bike, and just have a chat about what it felt like and what did you notice about your balance and everything else. When we have an opportunity to engage, even just in a conversation around a new skill or a new piece of information, again, it generates new connections, additional connections in our brain. The emotion thing, generally for kids, it's not too hard to get them emotionally engaged in wanting to ride a bike. But again, it's important just to check in on where they're at. And if they are aggressively indifferent to or aggressively ambivalent to the whole learning to ride the bike, things like I couldn't care less, it's not going to happen. And the last one, spacing. So if we put a child on a bike, or anybody, first time we get them to learn how to ride a bike, and they practice for 20 minutes, and they're sort of okay, but we know if we took the training wheels away that they would probably fall over at some point. That's just not quite right. But they've had to go for 20 minutes, so we just stop. And we don't do anything for 12 months, and then we put them back on the bike. I'd love to know your thoughts. Would they have retained some of the skill, or would they be back to square one? What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. square one or square two? Back to square one, Kathleen. Thank you. Yeah. Retain some, possibly. It's not an either or, but I suspect that if we spent 20 minutes on an activity like that and then didn't go near it again, and this is a brand new activity for whoever it is, whether it's a child or an adult, there's not much we would have retained, other than the fact that we'd probably know where to face, like we wouldn't sit on the thing backwards, maybe, deliberately. So, ages model, really important. Just a couple of other quick things, and then I'm going to hand back over to Danette. One of the things that we're understanding a lot more now about active learning is, again, this principle that we are responsible for our own learning and development forever. So sitting back and waiting for our boss or our employer, the organization, to suggest some training, to offer some training, to pay for some training, whatever it happens to be, is the opposite of active learning. So not only do we need to take responsibility for engaging more, and again, if I go back to the ages model, you could use that as a metaphor for thinking about how do you show up in any learning opportunity, whether it's a masterclass, a webinar, whether it's a face-to-face in-person workshop, whether it's a conference, whether it's a mentoring session or some on-the-job learning. How do you show up? How are you paying attention? What are you doing to generate more connections, more ideas around that information? Are you emotionally engaged in it? What are you doing to space and revisit that learning, that information over time so that it embeds? We are responsible for our own ongoing personal development. It's ours. This is the crux, the foundation of active learning. And a couple of things to think about in the context of career opportunities. Being proactive about personal development, about your self-development, learning ongoing, is a much better message to send to your employer, to your boss, etc., than the opposite. And the proactive learning or active learning, being proactive about your ongoing learning and development, is not just about how you learn stuff that's relevant to work. This is a model we can apply to things that we are interested in outside of work. And the interest thing is really important because, again, if I'm interested in it, I'm likely to find it easy to pay attention. I'm also likely to find it easy to have a positive emotional attachment to it. So a couple of key things to finish up on in terms of a process that you can use to engage around self-service learning. And this also goes back to Danette's comment before about the 1% growth. We don't go from zero to hero overnight. Social media, some of the mainstream media would like us to believe that that's possible. It doesn't happen that way. We get from zero to hero, or from wherever we are to wherever we want to get, just by small, consistent daily improvements. It has always worked that way since we came down out of the trees or out of the ocean or whatever whatever it happens to be. Ever since history was recorded, this is how human beings have become exceptional. So identify the key learning objectives for you. And again, this would be work-related or it could be personal. What are your learning objectives? And just pick one or two. Don't make it big. As Danette said before, start small, start simple, just make it little steps, but be consistent. Identify your key learning objectives and then just locate 1, 2, or 3 resources that you can access today that are going to help you learn or move towards those learning objectives. One of the great things about technology and existing on this planet today is we have access to so much information, and so much of it is free, and it's still quality. So identify the resources that you can access and then spend just 15 minutes a day on those resources. That's it. It doesn't have to be 2 hours a day or 3 hours a day. 15 minutes will get you where you need to go over time. It just needs to be done consistently. If we go back to the ages model, again, think about attention. I don't want to have any distraction. while I'm engaging around this learning thing. And then just repeat. It's that simple. Step 1, identify the objective. Step 2, find the resources. Step 3, 15 minutes. Step 4, do it again tomorrow. And the other thing, I'd probably add a step 5 to that, share your experience with someone else. The social learning aspect of learning is also hugely, hugely important. Okay, Ben Franklin, smart guy, did a couple of things. Tell me and I forget. This is so true of children. Come on. And sometimes husbands, I don't remember her telling me that, really. I wasn't paying attention when she said it. Tell me and I forget. Oh, hang on, Danette's on the call too. This is embarrassing. Teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. Now, this was written by someone who's been dead for a long time. Most of it is still true. The only thing I don't like about this quote, now that I've read it again, is it still implies that somebody else is getting me involved. If we're going to talk about active learning, about self-service learning, we need to flip this around and make it more, it is my responsibility as the learner to get engaged in the learning, if that makes sense. Questions, ladies and gentlemen, before I hand back over to the delightful Danette. One sentence from each of you. What stood out most for you from that part of the masterclass? Awesome, Kathleen. Yeah, thank you so much. I like very much that learning is a personal responsibility. Yep. Thank you.
And Al's put his in the Q&A.
Yeah, he has. Al just likes me. Al, it's great to see you on the webinar, by the way. Long time no see. Need to do more than just read. I need to live what I learn. Don't we all? Well, perhaps I need to decide out of what I learn, what parts do I need to live or what parts do I want to live, as opposed to some stuff that I might just learn and it was fun to learn it, but it may not be as relevant or useful as some other stuff. But thank you, Al. I think it's a great comment. Learning in itself, you know, just taking in information is relatively easy nowadays because we are just surrounded by it, bombarded with it if we choose to be. Danette mentioned human knowledge is doubling at an incredible rate and it's not going to slow down. So getting access to information, knowledge is easy. We can do that every single day, but there's a massive step from that to learning, embedded learning over time, which is an awesome segue, I thought. Thanks for the comment, Al, really appreciate it. Back to Danette to talk about some stuff.
Thank you, Graham. And let's just stretch because we've been going for nearly an hour now, which is pretty amazing. So let's just do a quick, to get a bit of movement and shake it out a bit, just to bring ourselves back in. Awesome. Now, what Graham was talking about, I just wanted to add, because I learned something new yesterday on how to continue to refresh that learning and make sure that it works for me. So earlier I was talking about how I flag books, and this one is the Jim Collins book. That's his latest one. Yesterday, a client invited me to a conference. So it was an online virtual conference where Jim Collins was the lead speaker. So I watched the conference and he spoke about this latest book, plus his previous books, about what makes a company go to great and be sustainable over time. So it has an impact on the world or its particular market. And one of the things I noticed is, because I was talking to Graham on our drive home this morning when I was awake, was that by watching the video of him speaking yesterday, and he had a little model behind him which sort of mapped out the key elements that he's learned over 35 years of watching or looking at really great companies, is that gave me a different perspective from just reading the book and flagging it. So one of the things I went to myself yesterday is watching a video of perhaps the author speaking about what they've written about, or looking at if they have models from their particular books or if you're listening to the audio book, is another way of just refreshing that knowledge and, as Grahame was saying, spacing it out, but using a different medium so it's a bit more sticky. So that was just something I learned yesterday, which actually worked really lovely with what we're doing today. So there's a couple of tools, and I'm not going to go through all of these because I agree with Kathleen. If you read everything on the slide, I could have just given you the slide. We know that smaller learnings of things is better than lots of it. So chunking just means breaking it down into small individual things. There's a website called Masterclasses, and what I've noticed in their videos is they have within a video little snippets where it's a distinct point. So they've actually worked out the chunks of, say, a 5-minute video, that this 30 seconds is on this topic, and they actually lead that in the start of that particular chunk that they're going to share. So they actually highlight it for the watchers. We can use things like case studies. If you've ever done a World Cafe, what we do with a World Cafe, and you could do it virtually as well as face-to-face, is set up a room with different tables and lots of butcher's paper with pens, and you focus on a topic, but you ask different questions on different tables, and people move around the room, discuss it in groups, and share their knowledge, and then write down the important parts. And again, that's a really active way of doing it. Whether you're doing it in person or even online, that's more active than just sitting and listening. I love the bit about and Shay said this, the social aspect. The more collaborative it is, the safer it is, and we learn off each other. I learned a beautiful quote the other day that everyone you meet knows something that you don't. So when we collaborate, we are guaranteed if we're curious, we're going to learn stuff off other people. So we'll go to the next one, Grahame. So this is what an active classroom can look like. So the top one, obviously not so active, the teacher's at the front and it's all about that, versus coming together and chatting and working on particular things. I watched a lovely TED video where a teacher was saying that he worked out people had different learning styles. So he created activities so people could use those learning preferences and learning styles in order to be able to learn about their topic. And he was teaching science. And so you would see the classroom set up different in different areas for those different learning styles. But he said the funnest one was that he would say, at the end of the term, I'd like you to do something artistic to demonstrate some of the learnings you have. And you can use anything to do this. And he had this photo of these twins who were learning biology, and they had a pair of jeans, and they had on one side mother, on the other side father. And it was to demonstrate that the two of them were a mixture of mum and dad's genes. And it was like really, really cute. And I thought, what a great idea. So allowing people to be creative can be really, really helpful. All right. And this is where we're going to drop the slides for a second, because what I would love for you to do is grab a blank piece of paper and a pen. So I'll give you 30 seconds in case you don't have that blank piece of paper and a pen, just to grab it, and then come back and we're going to do an activity together. And here we could have music while we were in between, but we won't. But that could be something you could add in terms of if you were doing online learning.
Is this a segue into the pop-up karaoke session?
Yeah.
Danette, is that... Where's Kathleen? Is she still with us? No, she left. Suddenly the number of participants has dwindled. What's going on?
So if you turn your piece of paper on its side first, and what I'd like you to do is to fold it into thirds. And then I want you to turn it so that the long side is in front of you. And I want you to fold it in thirds again. And once you've done that, I want you to open it out. And what you should have is 9 rectangles.
I have a bonus 2 holes as well.
Now, using your pen, and whichever way you turn it, it doesn't matter, I want you to, on the top, write show, ask, and activity. So it should look a little bit like this. Now this is, if you're running, say, a workshop or something with a group of people, this is a lovely way to think about how do I make it a little bit more active. So I'm going to give you an example and then we're going to actually use this to think about it. So first of all, what am I holding? In the chat box, if you can see what I'm holding, type it in the chat box. Beautiful, a paper clip. So I've showed you a paper clip. Now, that's a visual, gets people engaged. And using objects around people is a really good way to get them active. So you can say to people, hey, find something, pick it up and show it to the group. So here I've showed you a paper clip. Now I want to ask you, what could you do with a paper clip? So in the chat box, I'd love for you to come up with maybe 2 things you could do with a paper clip other than just clip paper. I want you to think a little bit outside the square. What could you do with a paper clip? Oh, I like that, Kathleen. Pick a lock. Excellent. Love that out of the box thinking. Make a chain. Beautiful. Bend it out. Yep. Into a fiddly toy. Fabulous. Okay, I want everyone to celebrate the fact that you came up with something straight away. That is awesome. Now I'm going to share an example of what someone else did with a paper clip. There is a gentleman called Kyle McDonald who is a Canadian blogger. And when he was 19, he decided to test what he could do with a paperclip. Now his paperclip was a red paperclip, but other than being red, it was exactly the same as the one I'm holding up. And he decided to see if he could trade his red paperclip online. And over 12 months, he traded that red paperclip from one red paperclip, 14 trades. He ended up with a 2-story farmhouse in Saskatchewan, Canada, that he owned. So he took this, used creative thinking, a bit of negotiation skills. I know, Kathleen, isn't it amazing? And ended up with his own house. Now, he then wrote a book about that, and he's also done a TED talk on that. So when we think about show, which I did, I asked you a question, I did. Now I'd like you to come up with an activity about another object that you have around you that others could learn from. So I want you to look around where you are and just come up with one activity, come up with something you're going to pick up. It could be just a pen. And I want you to just come up with a really simple activity to help others learn something. And think about what's the purpose first. So I shared that one to show you that a paperclip isn't just a paperclip. So maybe a pen's not just a pen. What could you do with that? Oh, I like that, Shay. Water bottle, spin the bottle activity. Icebreaker, awesome. Glass of water, thank you, to show light refraction. Yeah, so simple everyday objects can actually be really useful in terms of online activities or face-to-face. And the moment you ask people to go searching for things, they're already moving, and then you're asking them to think. So in a workshop, you could actually throughout think of show, ask, and activity, or it could be show or tell, ask. What's an activity that can embed those learnings? I like that, how your kids use pens as a pea shooter. Such a good thing, isn't it? The one thing I was going to say is I've seen an activity where you give someone a pen, you get two people, so you pair them up, get them to sit back to back. You give one person a pen and a blank piece of paper, and you give the other person a picture. And the person who gets the picture has to describe, without saying what the picture is, what they need the other person to draw. And the person with the blank piece of paper and the pen has to draw what the person is describing. And it's hilarious when they turn around and share, because describing what you're looking at, and you often miss what you're describing. It shows how we don't always communicate as clearly as we think we can. So that could be something that's really quite helpful. And this is Kyle at the farmhouse that he...
Well, Kyle and his wife at the house in downtown Saskatchewan.
Yeah, how cool's that? So, and he was only 19 when he did that. So at 20, he owned his own house just by using a paperclip. I love that one. All right, let's go to the next one, Graham. So some other tools. Some of you will know, some of you won't know. One of my areas of expertise is government finance. And I often teach people who don't know anything about finance about government finance. And so I use a bucket to describe the budget process. So if you imagine just a bucket, an ordinary bucket with an arrow going in, which is all the money the government collects, and then an arrow going out, which is all the money government spends, it's a simple way of representing the budget process, which is government gathers money and then it spends that money. And I link it with the Constitution and stuff like that. But the simple concept of a bucket is really easy to understand. We know that when we link something new to a thing we already know, it really does help us to make that switch from I have no understanding of this to, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand it. Technology can be wonderful, but we don't want to overuse it as well. Things like videos, role plays can also be helpful. Again, it's thinking about the preferences of the people you're learning, and this could be you, and what works best. Now, I love this, and this is really going on a reflective journey. And I'll give you an example where instead of, and this was done by another organisation, instead of sitting people down and going, okay, we're going to talk about work health and safety, and I'm just going to take you through the legislation and blah, blah, blah. What this organisation did is it created groups of 4 new inductees, so people who just started at that particular organisation. And they teed up for them to go and interview a manager in the different part of the facility. So they had, I think, 4 groups. Each group went off, visited a different part of the facility, interviewed a different manager. And they had to come up with some questions so they could learn about work health and safety and why it was important and what they needed to do given they were starting at a new organisation. They had half an hour to come up with the questions, go and interview the person, talk together, work out what were the important bits to share, and then come back and share with the rest of the group. Now, again, you could do this virtually. It wouldn't necessarily have to be physical. And what they discovered was everyone came back really invigorated because they'd designed the questions. So it was self-directed for them. They got to meet someone who was passionate about why this was really important. They picked up some stories and they were able to work out what were the important things they needed to share with the other groups that were interviewing other people. Now, that's a really simple way, rather than just saying, sit here and listen. Okay, go off and work with others and go through a reflective journey. The other thing is sometimes just using imagination. Now, I'm going to get all of us to do this. Graham and I will turn our cameras off for a second, and we call this nowadays on things like Zoom, podcast listening. So there are times when we always have our video on where it can be distracting. So sometimes it's good, in fact, on online learning to turn the video off and perhaps asking a question where you get people to imagine. So I used this a couple of days ago with a group of students, and we were doing presentation skills, and I'm going to get you to do this with me now. I want you to imagine that you're going to be asked to present in front of a group of 300 plus people. You're not really confident about the topic and you're feeling quite nervous. So I want you to put your body and your face into the shape of how you would be feeling in that situation. Now, I know most of you can't turn your video on. It's okay. I still want you to just imagine the face, the body expression. And Grahame and I will just put ours on for a second so you can see it. And this is what you would do with the people who are learning this. Now you'll see hunchy body, not looking real confident at all. Grahame, you going to turn yours on and show them what you would look like? He's gone. Now, we're going to turn our video off again because we're going to imagine a different scenario now. I want you now to imagine you are really confident. So you knew your topic really well, you've practiced a lot, you're feeling amazing. I want you now to hold your body and your face in that, I've got this, I'm going to rock the house. And you know that you're going to rock the house because you're really passionate to serve the people you're going to be talking to so that they can have an impact on the world. Just hold that really confident body and your face. So I'm going to turn my video on. If you can turn your video, feel free to share. Now that's one way of really engaging active learning, by getting people to turn the video off and imagine, get them to change their physiology, and then turn the video on and share. And we know a lot of the brain science. The more we see one another, the more we build that trust and rapport. And it's why when we're teaching others, it's really important to have that video on wherever we can. All right, next one. Next one, Grahame. Thank you. There it is. So the more people can teach each other, they do presentations, maybe excursions sometimes, and they, again, can be virtual excursions. A lot of museums, for argument's sake, now are online and you can do virtual tours. So they can be really helpful. One thing that you can use breakout rooms for is things like brainstorming. And again, it's a really active way of learning. Games are another one. And if you're online, you can do, there's a lot of online games that can be really helpful in terms of active learning. Having collaborative documents can be really helpful. Sometimes when you ask a question, you could set a timer. So you give your people 5 minutes, or you've got 2 minutes to answer this question. Thinking also about what could we do pre and post the class to make it better. Now, the learning journal and the action plan, we're going to just try this now because I really love this activity. I got it off a gentleman called Chad Littlefield. I always like to share resources when they're really helpful. So I'd like each of us to just type 1 or 2 things that you're going to try after this in the chat box. Now, once you've done that, because you're going to be sharing your learning journal, we're going to read others and share one insight that you go, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So in the chat box, 1 or 2 things that you've learned so far, and then read what everyone else has shared as well. Excellent. So now you can look at other people's things, and we've shared what we've learned, but you also will quite often help people via them reading what you've written to actually spark them to go, oh yeah, actually I really like that idea of so the group sharing of experiences. So I'm going to add that to what I'm going to take in terms of actions afterwards. So that can be a really simple thing to do just by using the chat box towards the end to get people to share their insights, what they learned. I like that, Graham. All right, thank you. Graham, I'm just waiting for you to press the next one. It doesn't let me for some reason.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were doing this as an activity because I was going to say that my other takeaway from that one was the group sharing the experiences, because that's also a great segue into the pop-up karaoke session, which sadly is not happening today, Kathleen. Sorry. I've been told.
And just beautiful quote.
Yeah, I quite like this one. Times have changed. Learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. In other words, don't stop learning, because the world will not stop changing. And what we knew a year ago, some of what we knew a year ago is now completely irrelevant. Some of what we knew 6 months ago is also now completely irrelevant. And that's one of the beautiful aspects of being alive and being human on this planet right now, is that we get the opportunity every day to choose to unlearn some things and to relearn some other things, and then to learn some new things all over again. No audio, no vid. So come on, Kathleen. I bet the audio works. I bet it does. Because I'm not sure. Could we do a chat karaoke? How would that go? I guess we could try it. What's the song that we all know? No, we won't do that. We'll move on. No cheap. I'm going to send you up a laptop with a video and yeah, probably not. You're welcome. So one of the other things that's hugely important in the context of active learning and is this multicolored confetti, the happy dance that Danette is now demonstrating. It is celebrating every small step that we take towards learning something new, or relearning, or re-engaging with learning. We know, again, from brain science, that whenever we celebrate, and to celebrate can be that, it can be doing the happy dance. It just needs to be an act. So use your body. It's not just a mental thing. Get your body, get your physical self engaged in it. It is an act that for you is like a mental high five, or patting yourself on the back saying, that was awesome, well done, congratulations, that's brilliant. Every time we do this, we get a little hit of dopamine in our brain. Every time we link the act of learning, so one small step on a learning journey, we link that to a little dopamine spike, because our brain likes dopamine. It's like, it feels good, woohoo, I want more of that. So what we're doing over time is linking feel good to the learning journey. And I call it a journey because that's all it is. It's just one small step at a time. So if we go back to the 1% wins, if I decide that I'm going to spend 15 minutes today, this afternoon, or tonight, or 15 minutes first thing in the morning, learning part of something that I want to learn, take one step towards my learning objective. And I'm just going to do it for 15 minutes. At the end of that 15 minutes, I absolutely should be doing the party dance, or doing this, or rocking out to my favorite song, because what I've just done is spectacularly good. So never, ever forget to celebrate. Always the small steps, not the big ones. Danette's already talked about this. The social aspect of learning is so important. So if you are running or facilitating or leading any sort of learning engagement or opportunity for other people, make sure you connect socially. A couple of other things around technology. In a learning, and if you're trying to create an environment for learning, this is might be relevant for your team, for argument's sake, at work, and particularly if some of your team are working remotely or working from home. Get the audio right, get the lighting right as best you possibly can. There's some really good science to show that, you know, if I can't see the facial features of the person speaking on a webinar, a masterclass, on the other end of the Zoom call. If I can't make out their face, part of my brain does not trust them, particularly if I don't know them. So it lowers the trust, and when it lowers the trust, that also changes the amount of attention we're going to give to that person. So, and the other thing is audio. Yeah, Danette mentioned before that we can engage. You can flip between doing audio, video, and just doing audio. Sometimes a change up is a good thing, but if the audio is to the point where if it's not good enough quality and people can't really make out what I'm saying, that's a problem. So do what you can to get the lighting acceptable. Make sure your audio is good. If you're running Zoom or Teams sessions or whatever the other platform you might be using, WebEx, use a headset. Don't rely on the microphone on a laptop or the microphone on your webcam. They're okay, but they're not great. Use breakout rooms. Again, if we're doing this virtually, if this is a digital environment that we're creating, then take advantage of the breakout room technology. You know, Teams has finally got its act together in terms of breakout rooms. They work really seamlessly now. So find opportunities to engage people in smaller group or in pair activities where you take them out of the main room and they just get to pair up. And again, going back to just repeating Danette's comment before, try and create opportunity for the first sort of breakout room session. Give them a couple of minutes to do the social thing to get to know each other a little before they engage around the content. Excuse me for a second. Have a white screen. Sometimes a blank screen is the best thing you can possibly have. What is on that screen? Is that a trick question? Well, yeah, it sort of is. Use a whiteboard. If you're in person, use a whiteboard. Get people to get up instead of you. If you are facilitating white, thank you, Danette. That was brilliant. It was actually white. It was a slightly off white. I think it was a polar. It doesn't matter. Use a whiteboard. In person, get other people up to scribe on the whiteboard, rather than just if you're leading the class or the group or the conversation. Yeah, engage other people, get them up on their feet. If you're using a digital environment, use a digital whiteboard if the platform you're using has one. Change the visual so it's not just slides. Bring emoticons into it. They're awesome. Maybe not the semi-sad one. I probably should have whited that out. Maybe, can I do that? I can probably do anything really. You know, so maybe we'll just highlight the really positive ones, but you get the idea. And clearly this is not an art class. That's probably not going to go away. It will, or it won't. Another thing that you can do around active learning, and this goes back in part to the session that Danette was running earlier around the paperclip, and how you convert or how you trade up from a red paperclip to a 2-story house with no cash, no money exchanging hands whatsoever. That is phenomenal. Imagine what he learned along the way. So one of the things that you can do to create an active learning environment, and well, just as a process, so it doesn't have to be relevant to work. If you just want to get people engaged around the idea, the concept of active learning, what does it look like? Is get them to go, if again, you do this in a virtual environment, get people just to get up for a minute, go around the house if you're at home or the office, find an object. Doesn't matter what it is. Maybe not a power tool, but otherwise just find an object, bring it back. And then you're going to go into a breakout room in groups of 4. And one at a time, you're going to share and get them to turn their video on if at all possible. And you are each going to share, one of your objects. So mine is like a really nice, brightly colored paperweight thing that we got a few years ago at a little shop in Berry, South Coast, New South Wales. And then what you're going to do is have a conversation for 10 minutes about how you could improve that object. So what could you do to make that better? Doesn't have to be work related. The purpose here is to get people thinking about what active learning looks and feels like. So, oh look, someone's scribbled all over my screen. What we're going to do now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn the annotation off because I've created a monster. And Danette is going to explain the blank to you.
All right. So that literally could be, and this, we're not going to do a breakout room because I am conscious of the time. And also I know that we don't have, not everyone has video and or audio. So it would be difficult to have a discussion if you don't have audio, for example. But this is, with breakout rooms, 4 is generally best practice. So more than 4, people tend to go quiet, but 4 or less tends to get a discussion happening in those breakout rooms. So with a bigger group, it's a lovely way of bringing people together and posing a question to them. Now, one of the things I've found on some platforms is the slide, if you're using a slide to explain the activity, doesn't go into the breakout room, but there's usually a thing that you can type in and send that to the breakout rooms. The other thing I would say is if you are facilitating is pop into the different breakout rooms because that can be really helpful as well, just to learn some of the discussions and then encourage each group to share. If you've got lots of groups, you might go, okay, we'll pick 3 groups here and later on question we're going to pick a different group. So you don't always have to get every group to give you an answer after the discussions. And how beautiful is this quote? And I have to say I honour those of you on today's masterclass because you are demonstrating that last one, which is really lovely. So what is one thing that you're going to apply from today moving forward, whether it's to run more active learning with your team, for argument's sake, or just for yourself or those around you? Love us to share in the chat box. Beautiful. I love that, Kathleen. Yeah. So when you're doing those presentations, just thinking of a couple of different ways. Now, I've found using everyday objects is a really good one. Excellent. Drawing games with children. I love it. Keeping it light and fun. One thing that might be really helpful for those of you who are doing presentations with others, and again, I learned this off Chad Littlefield, was before people come into the room, have a question that you ask for those that turn up early, so that those that might come in a little bit late, the activity and the discussions have already started happening. And with that, if people do have video and audio, you can ask the question, then get them to just unmute themselves and share. It could be, what was the worst learning experience you've had? Why? That sort of thing.
Or what was the funniest dad joke you've heard? Which honestly is something that I lead in a lot of my workshops with, because mine are terrible apparently. So I'm always on the lookout for good material. Sometimes it's helpful. Like, what's nifty, economical, and drives around Paris? Oh, it wasn't a rhetorical question, ladies and gentlemen. What's nifty, economical, and drives around Paris? It's the hatchback of Notre Dame. You're welcome.
Oh.
You're welcome.
Oh no, Kathleen, you're like Graham. All right, Graham.
So the additional resources, we will send you a copy of the slides out, folks, so don't stress. You're welcome, Kathleen. It's not mine. I have to be honest. It's not mine. None of them are, and that's perfectly okay. We will send you a copy of the slides so that you have access to all of these additional resources, so don't feel that you have to write them all down. We are just about out of time, ladies and gentlemen. So personally, for me, I'm going to hand over to Danette to close. But can I just say a huge thank you to everyone for being with us on the masterclass today. I hope it's been of value to you, and look forward to connecting with you again sometime soon. Have a fantastic week. Thanks again. Sweetheart?
Yes, and I would like to say the same. This year we changed it up. Last year we did 45 minutes. This year we thought we'd go a bit deeper and do an hour and a half masterclass. We'd love your thoughts about that. So if you enjoyed it, when we send through the slides, let us know. If you thought, no, I prefer the old format, let us know as well. Anything we can do, any topic that you'd be interested in us talking about, because we've decided this year we create 3 themes for the first 3 months, then we'll create 3 more after that. So anything that you would be interested in us going deeper on, please let us know. And I'd like to do this, celebrate with all of you, and I'd love that you celebrate with me the fact that you've stayed till the end and contributed the whole way through. So
and
thank
did not
you,
fall
everyone.
asleep at all. Oh, sorry, I was talking about me. Just me.
So have a magical rest of the week and looking forward to catching up soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.